champions, the United States of America.
Neal there. And now he drills one deep to right field. There it goes. See ya. His first Yankee home run, and it gives the Yankees a 1-0 lead.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 65 of Sports Speak. Hope you're doing well. I'm Eddie Kalegi.
I'm Tim Moore.
We're joined today once again by the host of the Nothing But Sports podcast, Raheel Jazzball. I'm also on a new computer, so looks a little clearer on my screen, so that should be nice. A lot to talk about. We delved into a lot last week with Tristan Beazle with NBA free agency, MLB trade deadline, both happening at the same time, but we're starting to see these moves pan out for some teams and not really help others. And of course, the NBA Summer League has started. More action has happened across the NBA. And that's kind of where I want to start this show, because the Knicks made a bit of a surprising splash by adding Kimball Walker. It's a move. It's bringing in someone who supposedly, you might consider a superstar back in the day with Charlotte Hornets, but has not been a good stretch for him in his time with Boston, riddled by injuries over the past couple of years. But it does bring in an established point guard, and it's absolutely an improvement from having Elfrid Payton out there. So the Knicks also had a decent draft. They brought in Quentin Grimes. They're returning a large portion of their roster. Derrick Rose is coming back. Do you think the Knicks, Raheel, got better during this free agency?
I do. I do think they definitely got a lot better. Kimball Walker is a huge upgrade from Elfrid Payton. And I know he's not, the old Charlotte Hornets Kimball Walker, but who knows? Maybe a change of scenery could get his groove back. I think just the whole situation in Boston was tough. He constantly struggled through injuries. He never really lived up to his contract, never really got the chance to, and a lot of Boston fans were still kind of angry with the whole Kyrie situation. So it just wasn't a good fit. Now he's coming to New York. He played at UConn, I think he grew up in the Bronx area, so he's coming home basically. So maybe that gives him more hunger. Also, you mentioned it, Eddie, they pretty much brought back, besides Reggie Bullock, which was an unfortunate loss, they pretty much retained their whole roster of last year. Brought back Gibson. Main important thing, they brought back Derrick Rose. Hopefully he'll have another great year off the bench. And this New York team, they've added some depth, and they also got Fournier. And I know they might have overpaid a little bit, but Fournier is a good shot creator. He can create his own shot. The Knicks struggled to create their own shots in the postseason, but now they've got more scores. Kimball Walker can work in the pick and roll situation. Mitchell Robinson's coming back from injury. Nerlens Noel now comes off the bench, which just gives them more depth. I mean, it makes them a better basketball team. And, people are complaining that, this doesn't make them a championship team. I mean, they were never a championship caliber team to start with, but it's an improvement from where the Knicks were in 2014, 2015, 2016. Every New York Knicks fan has to be smiling right now with the improvements they've made.
Yeah, and Fournier especially, I feel like, is still criminally underrated. We saw it in the Olympics when he was playing for France. He is an excellent shooter, and he somewhat fills that void with Reggie Bullock, but as Raheel said, he's also a shot creator, whereas Bullock was basically a straight-up shooter. Fournier gives you a little more versatility at the two guard. But Tim, for the Knicks, adding Kimball Walker, adding Julius Randle, of course, last year, there are some recognizable names, as the Knicks, of course, went through quite the stretch through probably the mid-2000 teens where it was a bunch of guys you've never heard of before. And now they're finally establishing themselves. But we've seen so many other teams improving in the East, such as the Chicago Bulls. We know what the Bucks are. We know what the Nets are. The Knicks, I mean, they had a good seeding. They were fourth in the conference and tried to put up a good fight against the Atlanta Hawks. Do you think we said these moves made them better? But in the grand scheme of things in the Eastern Conference, Tim, do you think this makes them better than the fourth best team in the conference like they were last year?
It's really tough because if I'm being honest, Knicks fans overall are optimistic for not just this offseason, but next season. But a lot of them face the true fact, and really, being someone that's not a Knicks fan, seeing it from a neutral side, it was unbelievable enough to see the amount of success they've had this past season. To me, if let's say they had the same team over again, 9 out of 10 times, let's be honest, this team probably wasn't going to replicate the same exact success it saw from last season. However, I do have to say, I'm bought into the fact that this team is starting to replicate and find opportunity under Coach Thibodeau for the future. And, we talked about it last show. In fact, I'm pretty sure I said the Knicks overall was my most surprising team, along with the Kimball Walker signing, in what's impressed me the most. Because the Knicks came into this offseason not just with the most money, but they came in with an opportunity to not just get the team better, but also really look at the future of this team overall. And the fact that the New York Knicks did not really push the envelope, granted, yes, they may have overpaid for Fournier, but the big thing is they got themselves two guards who can shoot the basketball, especially if Walker is healthy, and really fix a hole that they've had throughout the last few seasons. And the big thing too is, like you said, Raheel, how they partially overpaid for Fournier. I think the big picture is they still have a lot of money for the future. This team can still go out and get a big player next season or two. And I think the real big thing is, granted, for the Knicks, and to answer your question, Eddie, overall, I think this team improves. I still think they're going to be a mid-tier playoff team, maybe not exactly a 4, but just like the Chicago Bulls, I'm not bought onto this team right now. I'm bought on for their future. And I think the future is going to be the big thing for the Knicks moving forward. And maybe this team could be competing for a 1 seed. Not this season, of course, but I'm talking about next season and the season after. I mean, let's be honest. The Bucks are going to be the Bucks. The Sixers, granted, whoever's on that team is still going to be competitive, competing for a 1 seed. It's a matter of what other teams step up. And the Bulls and the Knicks are taking the right directions to do so. Again, not for this year, but maybe for years future.
Yeah, so I think it should be very interesting to see what happens in the Eastern Conference, because I feel like over the whole time I've watched the NBA, we've gone through so many years up until the last couple where it's just one team that's dominating the East. For a long time, it was LeBron James, obviously. But even, a couple years ago, it just always felt like there was one team constantly dominating. But the Toronto Raptors kind of turned the tide. And then, of course, with Miami last year kind of sneaking through, and then, of course, this past season with Milwaukee surprising the Brooklyn Nets, the Eastern Conference is wide open. Just like the West, I still feel like it is as well, even if the Lakers are healthy with this big core group. But I want to shift gears. We're talking about basketball. I want to talk about the Olympics a little bit. The Olympics just wrapped up with the closing ceremonies. But the Team USA, despite all the struggles, despite not really playing as a unit really most of the time and just chucking up threes, they still managed to win the gold medal. And it just really is amazing to see that they were able to pull this off. And Raheel, Kevin Durant didn't really play that well until the last couple of games, but they finally got in sync. Greg Popovich's coaching, I think, helped this team prevail towards the end, despite being heavily criticized through the beginnings of this Olympic run. Where do you assess this team? And do you think we're trending downwards when it comes to basketball for the Olympics? Because I sort of feel like this is just the start of the USA sort of trending down in future Olympics and other teams being able to compete, because we saw like Slovenia, they only had Luka Doncic, yet they got all the way to the quarterfinals, semifinals. They finally suffered their first national team loss with Luka. And teams like that having just one NBA superstar competing right up there with these Team USA, which is filled with NBA talent. So do you think this is the beginning of a decline for Team USA basketball?
It's tough, Eddie. I wouldn't say more as decline on the United States part, just the fact that as far as development, the world has finally caught up. I mean, think about it. I mean, people don't tend to recognize these players. Because they don't play in the NBA. But you could make the argument that overseas basketball is harder to play than it is in the NBA because the foul calls and all that stuff. So as far as trending downwards, as far as like dominance perspective, I think so. I think that, I don't know, we'll see what happens Paris 2024. That's still years away. We'll see what players decide to play the Olympics. Thankfully, Kevin Durant decided to play, but they're getting up there in age. This isn't, you see, the United States, everyone is used to the 2008, 2012, where they just blew away the competition when it was Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, Carmelo Anthony on one team. That's not the case anymore. Okay, the world is going to catch up. Australia had a very good team this year. The USA did a good job getting past them. France, even with very few, and they had some NBA starters, but very few, they were able to compete. So I do think it's a downgrade. And also, Damian Lillard said it. these players tend to play a lot better when they're playing for their nation, when they're playing for their country. So Evan Fournier, all of a sudden, first I saw Frank Ntilikina knock down a big 3-pointer. As a Knicks fan, I've never seen that in my life. So these players who are in the NBA but don't do much really tend to elevate their game on the as far as global stage. I'll still pick us for 2024, but we'll see. That's a couple years away. But it's as far as decline, I think so, Eddie, because you're not going to see the same dominance that the United States is used to.
And Tim, I think there's also an opportunity for being able to showcase talent as well, especially with how the NBA season was delayed. So the Olympics were kind of going on at the same time as free agency. You had Dante Exum, for example, whose NBA career has not turned out the way he would have hoped, yet balled out for Australia, and he's trying to get himself an opportunity in the NBA. A lot of these players that are playing with like 90-year-old Luis Scola there for Team Argentina are also trying to find themselves an opportunity to play professionally in America. So do you think that was part of the reason that we saw Team USA struggle, or do you really just base it on the lack of synergy between the players?
Well, I think it's a mix of things, because I still put a lot of blame in regards to how soft the NBA has become throughout the past few years, and to me that's an adaptation of a game. And you mentioned, how games are played overseas and in other countries. I truthfully think that it's the fact of how great of players the NBA's had in years past, all meshed together in regards to one great core. Obviously, we look at the Dream Team and so on. And we forget that, very commonly, that just because the NBA has some of the best players in the world doesn't mean there aren't great players elsewhere. And I think that we have to give a lot of credit to these other teams in other countries that are developing basketball nations. I mean, when you think about it, and obviously Team France, yeah, you had some NBA talent, but there's a lot of guys too that you looked in that France team that said, wow, maybe some of these guys could fit on NBA teams. And really, only the Olympics is a true testament to that. For example, I'll compare another team because, when we first talked about this, and I believe I said it the first time too, that the fact I had more confidence, for example, in Team USA baseball of winning an Olympic gold medal than I had in Team USA basketball. Team USA basketball had some of the best players in the nation, while baseball had a bunch of retired free agents, such as, for example, Team Israel's Ian Kinsler or Todd Frazier for Team USA, and so on. You look at the comparison. Granted, basketball right at the end of the season, not a lot of commitments and so on, different year from most after a long elongated season in the bubble. A lot of players opted to go, off and not do the Olympics this year. And I get that, at a year postponement, and there's lots so on. But overall, I have to say that, again, the difference of play and the lack of credit for other countries, I really do think played a massive impact. And I'm not saying Team USA is going to get worse. I truthfully think that we're going to see a relatively stacked roster, in the next Olympics. But again, that's a long time from now. But I want to emphasize the fact again, I truthfully think the Olympics and what we've seen in terms of basketball and the sport it's provided really, really puts a good focus on opportunity. And that's the true factor. I really think it's a great source of finding guys that you may not have known before, and unless you're a scout, may not have seen their style of play. And that's potential NBA talent at the end of the day. And I think it provided a good idea, and that's the reason why those players are playing hard, not just for the NBA, but overall to get attention for their basketball careers, no matter where they play.
Yeah, I gotta agree with you on that. It's really, and the NBA has become increasingly more, well, not the NBA, but basketball has become an increasingly more global game. And it's a perfect opportunity for these athletes to showcase themselves to an American audience and to American teams that, of course, will pay the most money. But the Olympics, speaking of money, they didn't bring in that much this year. I mean, the TV ratings were their worst in nearly 40 years. And you think about some of the Olympics and when they've gone on, it's kind of surprising that you got such low ratings. But I feel like personally, from being a viewer and a consumer of the Olympics for the past couple of weeks, and I think I've harped on this a little bit on this show, but there's a couple things that I didn't necessarily agree with when it came to the coverage and the promotion. first off, I was going to watch, I think it was like water polo. It was one of the first days. And I go on to NBC Sports Network and they're about to play the game. And the introduction, they say what the final score was and who won. And then they just go right into the game. Like that completely takes away the intrigue. And I know you have to play these games in delay because Tokyo is a 12-hour difference. And you're not going to have as extensive of that in 3 years for Paris, but you'll still have it in 6 months when the Winter Olympics are in China. So I'm sorry, I don't agree with which is telling your audience what happens, because for the casual viewer that just wants to tune in, especially if it's Team USA and you want to try to see if the Americans are going to win or not, being told the result, and that time it was actually that the Americans had lost, you're going to turn away so much of your audience. So that's number one. Of course, there's been a lot of transition to Peacock as well, to the streaming platform, but you know what? I mean, I can't really go against that necessarily because we all know that's kind of the way the world works nowadays. And we're seeing all these sports trending towards being covered on Peacock, or the MLB might even get Barstool Sports broadcasts on Peacock, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But I just feel like the coverage was lacking at some points for these Olympics, and the hype just wasn't all there. And certain athletes, I feel like there were so many world records broken in swimming, in track, and I feel like none of those, nobody really even talked about them, despite other years where when it was Michael Phelps or Usain Bolt, it became international events, massive stories. We didn't see that this year. This Olympics, all they talked about was Simone Biles and the basketball team, which of course were big stories, but you can't forget about everything else going on. And even the governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy, barely tweeted anything about the track team, but because Bruce Springsteen's daughter got a silver medal in equestrian, that's suddenly the biggest story in the world. So I just feel like it's disappointing that the Olympics didn't get the coverage that it has in the past. And I think COVID had a large thing to do with it. But I think there were some things that NBC and kind of the world could have done to kind of add more intrigue to the Olympics. Raheel, your thoughts?
Yeah, Eddie, I completely agree with you as far as the stuff. And another thing that kind of made me annoyed was the last couple days, the track and field events, the finals were in the morning, like 9:30ish, 10 o'clock in the morning. So that's well and truly, and they weren't broadcasting it live on NBC, NBCSN, CNBC, all this stuff. You had to watch it on the NBC Sports app. And the thing is, if you want to save it, you can't. You want to be surprised. I mean, and then they show it late at night, but fine, that's okay. But then you get an alert on your phone from a bunch of different things. Breaking news: this happened, and you're going to turn it off. Like the gymnastics finals was in the morning. I wanted to see what happened because Simone Biles wasn't going to compete, so I wanted to see who would win. And I pull into what I'm doing during the day. I was working at the time, and the first thing I see on my phone is breaking news: Suni Lee wins all-around medal. And yeah, I still watched it, but I would have loved to have been surprised by it. And towards the end, the only really thing I was watching was swimming, because swimming was the only thing that was live. Everything else was old on tape delay, and they had already told us the outcome because so many things, news apps would just give us what would happen, and it was disappointing. So we'll see if that changes, but they gotta figure it out, because if that happens, I think they're just gonna get lower and lower as far as ratings going. As far as the world records not being talked about, that's more expected because not many Michael Phelps wasn't there, Usain Bolt wasn't there, who people worldwide know about and people would tune in. But someone like a Caleb Dressel, a lot of people are not going to know about him, even though he won 5 gold medals and he's considered the next great American swimmer. Not many people are going to know about him just because he doesn't have the draws Phelps or any of these other stars. But it's going to be interesting. But I personally enjoy the Olympics.
Yeah, they got to figure it out, and they got to figure it out fast because the Winter Olympics in China are just a few months away, and Summer Olympics usually do better than the Winter Olympics. So, Tim, what adjustments can be made to try to salvage some good ratings in the winter?
Well, again, I really think the big impact in terms of this Olympics compared to years past, of course, first off, a year postponement plays a big factor in terms of excitement. And you would think, waiting a whole extra year that people would want to watch it. But, I do first off have to put a lot of blame on NBC. I mean, the fact of the matter is you're telling results before they're there and you're seeing a pre-tape play. I'm sorry, in Raheel, for example, you mentioned this one. You get a notification before you even get to watch something. that's a pure example of why some people, for example, when they want to go back and, they missed, let's say, a Nets game the night before, and they want to go back and watch the replay without knowing, they have to turn their phones off and do all this extra work. And it stinks that we, in today's society, have to do that overall just to shut out media. Where you go, you're going to tend to find a spoiler almost every single time because everything on your phones and everything is all based upon interest. But in terms of coverage, I mean, to me, it's so tough when you have to go on these external apps and do all these things, and you can't just simply turn on your TV anymore. For example, you mentioned Peacock Premium. For me, having to spend money to watch TV, granted, I pay money for cable already, but to pay extra money to watch something when I want to support my country is a bit tough to do. And I'm not saying whatever. It's not convenient. That's what it is. Cable television, granted, if you agree to have it or not, it's convenient. The thing is, with cable television, you can find ways to get it for free. Peacock, when things are streamed, you can't really get it for free unless people are streaming on things like Twitch and so on. And typically those accounts end up getting banned. And the start times for events, granted, again, it's a country that's 12 hours away from the United States here on the East Coast. When you're covering things, of course, for example, I wanted to watch Team Israel play baseball. I had to wake up 4 or 5 in the morning just to see Team Israel play baseball. So it's like, to me, the convenience aspect is tough for it. And again, I'm not going to fault, that's not NBC's fault. That has to do with host countries and so on. And I think, to me, again, because of those start times, because when events happen, compared to other countries, it makes things really, really tough. And to be honest, in terms of the Winter Olympics, I think that if you're NBC, again, you mentioned the big thing, having spoilers beforehand, at least from NBC standpoint, not notification standpoint. I think that you have to do a better job of that. Because again, let's be honest, you can't avoid time gaps. You can't avoid when things start. But what you can do is try to bring in live viewership to a more, how do I put it, a more easier standpoint when that opportunity is available. And for those that do miss, don't ruin the nostalgia, because that's the big thing. Back then with, for example, Michael Phelps, you mentioned a big, big name in terms of an icon. I think the big thing with the Olympics today and how political everything's being, and I don't mean in terms of the country, but for example, Simone Biles, that was massive, massive news, and people were focused upon drama things. And for example, too, it wasn't just American politics and situations that broke headlines. It was a lot of things with other countries too that took a lot of attention this year. And when you don't have big names or icons, for example, Simone Biles, I'm sure people wanted to watch her. Michael Phelps, obviously, people tuned into because he was an icon before. There was a lot of emphasis what he did before the Olympics for swimming. And I think really a lot of coverage of, how do I put it, outside of, major sports.
Well, yeah, I mean,
really has not been focused on as much. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, there was a little lag, but that's all right. But yeah, I feel like that's really at the point of this, that there's certain sports that get so much coverage, and there's just those sports that you think of just as Olympic sports that it's gymnastics, it's swimming, it's track, but there's so many other sports that are very compelling. I was talking about this on my Rutgers radio show, like handball, for example, is something that we I personally get really excited to watch it, but you can never find it on TV. And I was only able to stumble across it twice in the 2 weeks, and it was at the end of the game both times. So you got to get a balance going. But you know what? NBC, we know they were understaffed. They didn't send that many over because of COVID. Hopefully we're in a better situation in the winter to get things moving a little better for the Winter Olympics. But I want to shift gears to the final portion of this show. We're going to do some MLB Rapid Fire, where we're going to have 45 seconds to answer some questions. I'm going to start by asking myself a question. I mentioned it a few minutes ago about Barstool Sports potentially broadcasting MLB games. And let me just say, I'm a big fan of the MLB trying to find ways to appeal to younger audiences, but getting involved with Barstool Sports is going to ostracize a lot of people. It's going to make a lot of people feel isolated. That is not the way to go. And if you're going to use them for some talk shows and other stuff, why are you having Barstool Sports broadcast games? That's not even what they specialize in. To me, that's an asinine decision from Rob Manfred to even consider that. And if you're going to have Barstool broadcasting games that are then put on Peacock, that opens a whole other can of worms, because any subscription-based MLB games always cause drama. If you want to get into some of the internet media, try to affiliate yourself with like Cut 4, with John Boy, a lot of things that have a lot more respect and you can get involved with their Barstool Sports broadcasting games is a terrible decision. Tim, what's your opinion on this?
Yeah, I have to say it is ultimately a terrible decision. Now, granted, MLB has in the past streamed through YouTube and even Facebook and so on. And granted, those were successes, but I think you have to look at the difference. A lot more people use social media apps. Not saying that Barstool isn't known, because of course it's really one of the more iconic news areas in today's sports world. But at the end of the day, more people are going to go on Facebook and get access to something. More people are going to use YouTube. It's just that simple. Barstool is for a specific type of group of individuals, especially with our younger audience. But there is better ways. And for me, again, I just don't simply buy it. To me, it's not as marketable. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's just really, really tough for me to want to turn on a game and watch, Barstool icons. For example, I don't think you'll see David Portnoy call on a baseball game, but why would I want to see him call a baseball game over Joe Buck? I'm just saying.
Raheel, how about you?
Yeah, I'm in I'm in agreement with you guys here. I mean, the MLB has already done great. If you look at, they're actually improving ratings wise, and I think a lot of that has to do with more coverage of things like Sunday Night Baseball, stuff like that. That was a brilliant idea. But as far as the Barstool situation, no. Stay away from it. I think if they keep up at this pace, their ratings are going to go up, just because people are starting to lose interest in maybe the NBA because of how political it got and all that stuff. So just keep doing what you're doing, and keep trying your best with Sunday Night Baseball, because that is bringing a lot of viewers in.
Yeah, Sunday Night Baseball has really had a bit of a resurgence, and I think a lot of people have appreciated the Vas Sturgeon and A-Rod broadcasting booth as well, as a bit of a bump up from the past few years after John Miller retired. But let's shift gears to the games on the field. And of course, got my Citi Field behind me, and I can't be too happy about the Mets, who are already down 3-0 tonight against Washington and have completely gone into free fall, losing 9 of their last 11. Now Javier Baez is hurt. And I'm going to ask myself, do the Mets have any chance at salvaging this? And I got to say no at this point. I don't really see the Mets coming back. The Phillies got a statement sweep of them. The Mets have fallen to 2.5 games back, struggling right now as we speak against the Washington Nationals. Jacob deGrom won't be back till September. Now they're saying Noah Syndergaard might only pitch out of the bullpen, if at all. Francisco Lindor is still a couple of weeks away. And the offense is just terrible and so inconsistent. It's embarrassing. This was a team that was hyped up to be the best offensive Mets team since 2007, and we have not seen that whatsoever. There have to be some adjustments going into the future. I don't think Luis Rojas is the manager that's going to get this team very far either. Steve Cohen has to put his money where his mouth is and make some changes heading into next season. Tim, how about you? What do you see happening in the NL East?
Yeah, I agree. The fact of the matter is, a team that was so hyped to be such a good offense, and when you're only tracking for at best an 87-win season, if you can manage that and compete for an NL East title, that's simply just not enough for me. Listen, again, this team led Major League Baseball last season in batting average, led baseball in batting average. And that is when you have guys like Pete Alonso, who mashes home runs and had one of the worst career years. Granted, Jeff McNeil, again, not really relevant this year. Francisco Lindor, you paid him a lot of money. And of course, I know he's hurt right now, but the fact of the matter is, he has not lived up to that hype yet. Yes, you traded for Baez, but he's not an average hitter. He's a power guy. And I will say this, give the Mets some credit. Granted, they've fallen apart. We can't say that bullpen has gotten a little bit better this year. But your one thing that made you confident day in, day out, every 5 days was Jacob deGrom, and now he's gone. You're basically flipping a coin every single game on what is going to happen. Your one piece of confidence absolutely decimated. I mean, to me, the starting rotation was a risk as it is outside of Marcus Stroman, and even he hasn't been necessarily his best. Walker started the year off great, and he's been, up and down. Maybe we'll see what a Carrasco eventually has to offer. You mentioned Syndergaard going to the pen. I just don't know what to think about the Mets, and I truthfully don't think they're going to win the NL East. Teams are finally starting to come back to life in the second half.
Yeah, Raheel, over to you. Do you think the Mets have fallen out of favor in the NL East?
I think so. I think that series with Philadelphia, with the Phillies, really did, and it's a shame because I was pretty, even though I was positive about the Mets doing well this year. I actually want them to do well because the Met fans deserve to have something to smile about. But as soon as DeGrom goes down, and now is there too much on DeGrom? I mean, does he have to lower the velocity? What does he got to do to stay healthy now at this point in the season? Lindor, he hasn't lived up to the expectations. Baez, like you said, Tim, he's not a contact hitter. He's a power hitter, so he can fill up the stats when it comes to, but also when it comes to strikeouts and stuff. And I think the Mets have really, really fallen apart. We all know the team is streaky, but we'll see. And not to mention, they got 11 of their after this series versus Washington, they got 11 of their 13 next games against the Dodgers and the Giants, and they can't get 2 out of 3 against the Phillies. What positivity do you show there?
I know. And let's shift gears, though, to the San Francisco Giants, because I said that them and the Red Sox and maybe the Mets would come back to earth after the All-Star break. The Mets have, Boston has, San Francisco is still 30 games over 500, went into Milwaukee, won the series there. I mean, I'm just amazed. Everything was just all about the Dodgers or Padres. It was either one of those two teams. Who could spend more at the deadline? The Giants bring in Chris Bryant, make themselves better, have an outstanding pitching rotation with a lot of retreads. Kevin Gausman, Anthony DeSclafani, people who really couldn't find much in their careers, went to San Francisco as sort of an outpost and now are succeeding. And at this point, I'm starting to become a believer in the San Francisco Giants. This team has proved everyone wrong before. They won 3 World Series in 5 years. Not many teams in MLB recent history can even say that. The Yankees of the 90s are one of the only other teams who can even be in that conversation. Yet the Giants didn't have the best rosters that year and were still able to do it. So I think the San Francisco Giants are for real. Tim, do you think that they hang on and win the NL West?
I still think for them it's going to be a little bit tough to hang on to the NL West, but I'm not saying this team is not a World Series threat. Let's be honest. When you've been stuck the last few seasons with an aging Evan Longoria, you needed some help. Granted, Chris Bryant is aging as well, but I view it as this. Bryant mashes. They needed some depth pieces. And you turn around, you make some, trades, for example, a few years back when the Yankees traded for a guy named Luke Voigt, who turned out to lead Major League Baseball last year in home runs. You look at the moves they made. Mike Tauchman turned out to be a very solid depth piece. How about Thairo Estrada? Not a lot of people as well, for the record, talking about him in terms of that trade. He was batting nearly a 400 since being traded to San Francisco, and he's proven to be almost kind of like, for example, a Ronald Torreyes, a depth piece that can play infield and outfield and find ways to be effective even coming off the bench. So I'm going to say this overall for San Francisco. They have all the pieces they need. The question is, can the pitching last? Buster Posey, for example, he's played great. The infield overall really, really looks solid, and it looks like it has the capability to keep a World Series. I don't know if they hold on to the NL West, but I am still very bought in on this team potentially winning a World Series this year.
Yeah, I think this is like one of those years where they could really pull off something. Raheel, what do you see? Do you think the Giants hang on and win the NL West?
I mean, I think I have to say, I mean, all 3 of us last time I was on here came in and said that the Giants were going to come back to earth at the All-Star break, and it looked like it when the Dodgers got Trey Turner and Max Scherzer, and then here they turn around and then they get Chris Bryant. I mean, if any MLB fan will look at this roster and be like, how are they 30 games above 500? But I think they hold on to the division. Now, if they come up against the Dodgers in a 5-game series in the divisional series, that I don't know about, just because the Dodgers, anticipating Trevor Bauer does come back, the Dodgers pitching rotation is going to be insane as well, along to go with the offense with Mookie Betts, Max Muncy, Trey Turner, Corey Seager. So I'll back them to win the division, but as far as beating the Dodgers in a 5-game playoff series come divisional series, that's what I'm concerned about for them.
Yeah, because the Dodgers, of course, have plenty of postseason experience, 3 of the last 4 years winning the NL pennant. But let's finish off with this. The American League East is getting interesting. The Red Sox have fallen apart since the All-Star break. They are getting Chris Sale back. Tampa Bay playing well, where they were both buyers and sellers at the same time at the deadline, like they always are. Toronto now back playing at the Rogers Center, and the Yankees have heated up, but so has their COVID situation. So, Tim, who do you think is in the best position in the AL East here heading into these final 6 weeks of the season?
It's really tough, and I think that really we're going to find the true answer, if I'm being honest, come the end of this weekend. The Yankees, of course, are going to play their Field of Dreams an off day, but the big thing happening around this weekend is the fact that the Tampa Bay Rays are going to be taking on the Boston Red Sox. And I think for the Yankees, of course, you're on a borderline wild card aspect. You're trying to make games up on both Boston and Oakland. And for them right now, on this massive spurt of wins, obviously it's tough to decide. Do you want to see Tampa lose games, get closer to the East, or do you want to see your playoff hopes at least get a little bit closer against Boston? I mean, for me, Boston is faded, and they've, really looked underwhelming. But again, losing streaks don't last forever. This team still is pretty good offensively, and they're going to eventually find it again. But I truthfully think, granted, the Yankees are looking great right now. And again, to me, they look to be bound more for a wild card spurt. If they get the AL East, that's nice. But I really think the team that's still sitting and laughing is the team that didn't have to pay much to have a roster. And overall, that's the Tampa Bay Rays.
Yeah, Tampa, I mean, they were still the favorites heading into the season. And despite trading away Blake Snell, they still added Nelson Cruz. They still have all that young talent, and they're playing really well. Raheel, lastly, over to you. Who's the favorite now in the American League East?
I'm gonna stick with Tampa, just because Boston, they're you can sort of sense the wheels coming off, and the Yankees, I don't know how they're doing this, but I think at some point the COVID situation and the fact that they're really inconsistent as far as blowing leads and all that stuff, it's gonna come back to haunt them. They're allowed to get away with it like they did last night against the Kansas City Royals, but you do that against Boston or Tampa, you ain't coming back. And also remember, Yankees have a really poor record against Boston this year. I think they're 3-7. They've just split Tampa with about 500. Not to mention Tampa Bay's always got the Tropicana field, which is difficult to play in.
Well, we're going to have to wait and see. Just a few weeks remain in this MLB season. Nice to have a 162-game campaign back. But Raheel Jaswal, thanks again for joining us today on SportsSpeak.
Anytime, guys.
All right, so that'll just about wrap up today's episode. A thank you to everybody for tuning in. We'll have more next week. MLB, NBA, NFL preseason really kicking off this weekend as well. So I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about then. But until then, I'm Eddie Kalegi. And he's Frozen Tim Moore. And this is SportsSpeak signing off. We hope you have a great rest of your week.